Ahri is another one of those champions that many people can latch onto and enjoy playing repetitively. She has everything you need from a mid laner, mobility, burst damage, plenty of it, and very hard crowd control. She's a champion that helped carry me way back when she was first released, and I've been playing her a fair amount recently due to her becoming a little bit more viable with some recent changes. So today I'm going to be bringing you all a guide on how to play Ahri. My last one with Aurelia went over so well, let's hope the same goes here. Starting off once again with abilities, Ahri's passive is Essence Theft. Ahri gains a charge of essence with each enemy unit hit by any of her spells with a cap of 3 per spell. Upon reaching 9 charges, her next spell will heal her for a set amount of health depending on her level and AP for each enemy unit hit. This is a spell, or passive rather, that you can get by with not paying any attention to, but once you feel more comfortable with all your other abilities, try to keep this one in the back of your mind at all times. It can save you a trip to the fountain if you utilize it correctly, which will give you some nice extra gold in the laning phase specifically. Ahri's Q is Orb of Deception. Ahri sends out an orb in a line in front of her and then pulls it back, dealing magic damage on the way out and true damage on the way back. This is one of your bread and butter skills that you're going to be maxing first. You can get a ton of damage dealt very quickly by using this ability correctly, and it's also great for just clearing waves. Foxfire is Ahri's W. Ahri releases 3 Foxfires to surround her for up to 5 seconds. After a short delay after casting, each flame will target the closest enemy, prioritizing champions and dealing magic damage to the target. One thing to keep in mind here with this ability is each Foxfire is sort of considered like its own separate spell, meaning that they all have their own range for attacking enemies, and something like Rylai's Crystal Scepter, which gives a greater slow for single target spells and weaker slows for AoE target spells. This spell will proc that single target slow, even though it can technically damage multiple targets the way an AoE spell does. Charm is Ahri's E ability. Ahri blows a kiss that travels in a line in front of her. The first enemy hit takes magic damage and is charmed, forcing them to walk harmlessly towards Ahri while being slowed by 50% for the duration. This is a fantastic ability. Fantastic CC, fantastic for getting picks in team fights or for initiating one, and also fantastic for guaranteeing that you land both hits of your Orb of Deception, but we'll talk about that more a little bit later. Finally, Ahri's ultimate is Spirit Rush. Ahri dashes towards the cursor and fires essence bolts, dealing magic damage to up to 3 visible nearby enemies, prioritizing champions again, similarly to Foxfire. Spirit Rush can be cast 2 more times after the initial cast and have the same effect, while each enemy can only be hit once per dash. Playing Ahri at an effective level depends almost entirely on your ability to land skill shots, especially during the laning phase. While hitting skill shots on any champion is going to be different depending on the kind of opponent that you're facing and the rating that you're playing them at, here are a few rules and tips for you to keep in mind. Skill shots are all about mind games, knowing what your opponent is thinking, if they're anticipating your skill shot coming out, and which way they're going to try to dodge if they are. When you're in an open area not moving at all, there's an infinite number of ways that you can juke an ability, but those quickly fade away if that person is forced into a tight situation, both literally and figuratively. The mere presence of someone heading closer is enough to get another person to freak out and start moving sporadically if they think a skill shot might be thrown out at them. You can use this to your advantage in a number of ways. Maybe on Ahri, for instance, you can run at someone like you're about to charm them, and while they're busy trying to out-mind game you and dodge the incoming charm, zigzagging all over the map, just pop your W, start auto-attacking, lay out some damage, and ignore the skill shot altogether. Even if you eventually throw out the charm and miss, you'll have still won the trade with all the damage you put out by the mere threat of the charm coming out, and you can just focus on landing it for the kill next time. You can also use mind games like this to force an enemy into a situation where it becomes much easier for you to land your skill shots. So for example, when you're in mid, in the center of the lane, it's very difficult for you to land your charm. It doesn't go through enemy minions, and there's all sorts of space for your opponent to run around. Even if you just want to throw out the Q to harass, it will have reduced damage if it has to go through some minions, and again, your opponent has all sorts of room to dodge it. But here, on the other hand, things are much easier for you. This is actually the worst area in all of League of Legends that you should never put yourself in, between a tower and its wall. If you can force your opponent into this area during laning phase, or you just see them wander into it, you can almost guarantee landing your charm, since there's very few directions that they can physically move in, as well as their only options being fairly linear compared to you, perfect for landing skill shots. Always try to use the terrain to your advantage whenever you're playing a skill shot heavy champion. Landing skill shots in the open is much more difficult and is pretty much 100% mind games. You know the types of players at your respective rating, what they're thinking, and if or how they're going to try to dodge one. I can't give you too much advice there, but always just try to focus on figuring out what it is that's running through your opponent's minds and use that to predict their movements. When you do have a guaranteed chance at landing something, throw out your charm and your orb of deception simultaneously, starting off with that charm. If you do this, then the charm CC should last long enough for you to guarantee the true damage from your orb's return, landing on your opponent rather than them just being able to walk out of it and dodge it. You don't always have to throw out these abilities in such quick succession, but it's always better for your skill shots to come out as soon as possible after an enemy is stuck in any sort of crowd control, because that means you can guarantee landing them. It will make your job much easier. If you're having trouble landing your Q or landing your charms, you can have a jungler, especially if it's something like a Warwick or someone with very hard CC that can jump into the middle of the lane. They can help you out with that, but for the most part, just focus on landing those skill shots. That's pretty much the number one thing you should be focusing on, especially during the laning phase when you're playing Ahri. The rest of Ahri's kit is fairly standard and feels very natural to play with. Use your abilities to harass down your opponents if you can, maybe throwing out the occasional Q and see if you can land some skill shots and poke them down a little bit. Use your ultimate to jump in and close the gap to pick up some kills whenever someone overextends or isn't expecting all your burst damage. And also don't forget that you can use your Q to clear minion waves or shove lanes if need be. In the mid game, you should try to take advantage of your roaming potential if possible. Look to use your ultimate to gank other lanes or even see if you can catch the enemy jungler out of position. Your ultimate is a really nice movement ability that allows you to chase after your opponents to grab kills much further than other mid laners can, while simultaneously being able to use it as an escape mechanism if things get too crazy for you. Keep in mind you have essentially 3 flashes with your ultimate, plus your own flash if you have it up, meaning that you can dive really deep into enemy lines, pick up some kills, and still have enough charges to ult or flash away. Your ultimate should also have a fairly low cooldown later on in the game, so don't hesitate to dive in and pick off a kill if you do have the potential or if you see an opening line up for you. By the time you reach late game, you should focus mostly on putting out damage for your team, landing charms on high priority targets, and positioning yourself so you don't die. If you want to trick the enemy into focusing you with the Zhonya's, you can pick one up, ult into the middle of a team fight, throw out your abilities, Zhonya's whenever they're about to throw out their stuff on you, and then ult right back out when it's up. But for the most part, you are going to be wanting to keep your distance. Your Q is going to deal plenty of damage to any tanks that make up the enemy front line, especially with its true damage, coupled with its awesome kiting potential of your ultimate. Picking up a Rhyalize can also really help you with CC and slowing enemies that get kited really easily, someone like Udyr. It's a really good late game item that's actually fairly underrated in my opinion. Only pick it up if you're against someone who's easily kited, since it's not as cost effective compared to some of the other items in other situations, but for the most part there's some cool items that you do get to go late game depending on your preference. For your build, you're generally going to want to do standard mid lane mage stuff to start off with, Dorans into basic boots that will eventually either become sorcerer shoes or CDR boots. Your first item is going to depend on who you're playing against mid lane, but typically you want to work towards a Deathfire's Grasp, Death Cap, and Zhonya's Ring, rushing the Zhonya's first if you're against a Zed or Yasuo or something mid lane. For late game items, you should be looking towards Void Staff, Morellonomicon, and then you get to do crazy cool stuff for your final items like Rhyalize or a possible Lichbane even if you want to, or if you have the extra gold for it. It's a little bit situational, but for the most part it's standard mid lane mage stuff. Ahri is a really fun champion that I've enjoyed playing over the years. She can carry you quite far if you devote enough time to her, and she's might see a bit of a resurgence in popularity in the upcoming months, as some recent changes have sort of gone her way and made her much more viable. She's a very mobile, very fun champion, and I highly suggest picking her up if you're looking for a mid lane mage to pick up and play. She's definitely worth your time. Thank you very much for watching, good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.